Vasily Ivanovich served as a gamekeeper in the reserve for many years. It was he who served, because he considered himself a border guard, since he guarded the border between nature and man. He still believes that the gamekeeper has no friends, and everyone who enters the reserve without permission is a potential enemy, even if they are well acquainted. There is no place for pity in this invisible war between humans and nature. He is now retired and likes to reminisce about the old days. There were a lot of funny and sad things, but he definitely won't forget one case for the rest of his days. After all, thanks to the tiger, he remained alive. It happened many years ago. He had been working in the reserve for a long time and was an experienced gamekeeper. By that time, he had a wonderful wife, Nina, and a little son, Vanya. They named him after his grandfather. He was a man with a capital letter. He and his wife came here to work together. He became a gamekeeper, and she became a radio operator. After all, the only way to communicate in this area was a walkie-talkie. That year, the winter turned out to be very harsh and snowy. Such things happen, probably, once every 50 years. The huntsmen began to find animals on the rounds that were unlucky. They could not find food for themselves and froze right on the road. Vasily decided that the animals needed help after all. If you do not take some measures, then in the spring they will see a very sad picture. To prevent this from happening, he decided to feed his charges. To do this, he loaded 20 kilograms of meat onto a snowmobile and scattered it around the territory. After a day or two, I checked if it was eaten. As a rule, there was nothing left of the meat. And then, with a sense of accomplishment, Vasily returned back to the cordon. He liked the job, he couldn't even think of exchanging it for any other. Here you are with nature, and nature is with you. It's like you're in communion with her and with your thoughts. That day, as usual, he loaded the meat onto the snowmobile, checked that everything was securely fastened and set off on his way. It was freezing outside and a bit windy. He wanted to make a quick detour, scatter the meat as usual and return home. And, if there's time left, check the poaching trails to see if everything is quiet there. Poachers love to visit that reserve. They usually made their way through the fence and went deeper, where most of the animals gathered. Once he managed to catch some. They snuck in here at night. They wanted to get antler deer, young red deer antlers. Thank God, they did not manage to find the animals. But they found Vasily Ivanovich. When he chased them, the poachers tried to dump the backpacks into the bushes. But he noticed it in time, so he could easily prove their involvement. There have been many such cases, but this is not the case now. Vasily gathered everything he needed and set off on his way. The frost was cracking, steam was coming out of his mouth, and his mustache and eyelashes were quickly covered with frost. Since it was very cold and the blizzard was getting worse, he decided to finish his business as soon as possible. After all, he couldn't not go at all, the animals needed food. He drove faster than usual, everything was going well, but under the snow he did not notice how he ran into a fallen tree. He was thrown away along with the snowmobile. He fell, and his leg was crushed by a caterpillar. The meat flew in all directions. Vasily lost consciousness. After a while, he woke up and immediately grabbed his head. It was cracking and splitting. Apparently, he took a good hit on the snow crust. When he was able to fully open his eyes, he saw that his feet were lying under an overturned snowmobile. With the last of his strength, he was able to somehow get out from under it and walked away a little, and so he fell. Apparently, he recovered from the shock and began to realize what had happened. He didn't even realize that his arm was broken. He fell down and did not know that guests had come to him. A proud forest beauty, a tigress, came to the smell of meat. At first, she watched the man warily from afar, and then, when she realized that he was not moving, she began to slowly approach. She ate a couple of pieces of meat and then, having had enough, approached the man. She sniffed him carefully, twirled around him a little more and lay down next to his chest, closing the open coat. Vasily didn't understand what was going on yet. It seemed to him that he was already at home, in bed, and his cat Murka came to him. He put his hands in her fur, stroked her with his hand and began to warm them in her fur. The tigress was purring and clearly didn't mind it. With her ears, she listened attentively to what was happening around her. Meanwhile, Nina was already starting to worry. Her husband should have already returned home. The little boy started crying and asking where his dad was. It was completely out of character for him. Nina looked out the window. There was a blizzard outside and it was gradually starting to get dark. She looked out the window, painted with bizarre frosty patterns, and prayed to God that her husband would return. When she got tired of waiting, she tried to calm her son down, but he was moody and didn't want to calm down in any way, just dad and dad. She gave him a children's book and said that she had gone to get dad and if he would behave calmly, they would be back soon. Then Vanya calmed down, looked at his mother, stopped crying and took the book in his hands. Nina hastily dressed warmly, put hot tea in a thermos just in case, and set off on her way. She remembered that her husband had left on a snowmobile, so she had only skis left. She decided to follow her husband's usual path. He once showed it to her, just in case that it was getting darker and darker, and Nina was afraid she wouldn't make it. Ski poles were buried in the applied snow. It was hard for her, but she had to find Vasily. Suddenly, in the distance, she noticed an overturned snowmobile. She thought of the worst, but started to get closer. Soon she noticed the dusted pieces of meat on the snow. The only thing that allowed her to keep from being shocked was the thought that her husband should be fine anyway. After all, she completely forgot that her husband went with this meat to feed the animals of the forest. She went to the snowmobile. It was overturned, but Vasily was not under it. She began to look around and noticed a striped back in the dark. Then a head appeared, and the tigress, standing up and stretching, slowly left. Nina finally noticed that Vasily was lying next to the tigress. She ran up to him, started hitting his cheeks and rubbing them. Surprisingly, her husband's arms and chest were not that warm, but hot. Finally, she roused her husband, gave him a drink of hot tea. "I had to go home." But Vasily had a broken arm, and Nina herself would not have been able to turn the snowmobile over. Only the skis remained. But there was a very strong blizzard outside, and it was not very close to the house. Vasily, having come to his senses, decided to make something like a tent by an overturned snowmobile. It was a good thing that he always carried a thick overcoat with him. They took shelter from the wind and finally it became calmer. They sat in their shelter and warmed each other. Nina was finally able to examine Vasily's hand. That it wasn't that scary, but I still needed to get to the hospital as soon as possible. They sat in the tent for a while, and then the wind died down, and Nina looked out into the street. The blizzard that had been raging all day was finally over. There was a full moon in the sky and it even seemed to get a little warmer. They decided to leave the snowmobile here for now, and they slowly went home. Vanya met them at home. He had read the whole book and really wanted to tell Dad about that fairy tale about the kind tiger. Vasily smiled and said that he seemed to know one and would tell his son about it himself tomorrow. Vasily's hand was cured, and the doctors at the hospital were very surprised how he did not freeze himself in such a blizzard, having lain almost all day in the snow and in the wind. To which Vasily joked, he decided not to tell about that tigress, because they wouldn't believe him anyway, but he still told his son the promised fairy tale about a kind big tigress who did not let a lonely traveler freeze on the road, and since then the traveler thanks her every time he finds himself on this path. Vasily thought for a long time why she decided to warm him up. After all, this is a predator, and he can be said to be its potential prey. But apparently, by delivering meat and helping those animals, he was so grateful to her. Or maybe she just smelled something familiar from him. In any case, he is now grateful to this tigress for the rest of his life. Sometimes inexplicable things happen in life. For example, how is it when a tigress' gratitude helped her breadwinner, the huntsman? After all, he was not afraid to go and feed the animals in bad weather, not sparing himself. After all, he understood that it was his duty, and they couldn't do it without him. That's such a touching story. And thank you for listening to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and also click on the bell so that you don't miss new videos. Have a nice day.